This PowerPoint is on sensation versus perception, which is part of Chapter 5. A quote I really like related to this by Leonardo da Vinci is that all our knowledge has its origins in our perceptions. So everything we know originates in the way we perceive things. So let's first define sensation. Sensory receptors are specialized neurons that respond to specific types of stimuli. When sensory information is detected by a receptor, sensation has occurred. And we know the five senses: taste, touch, smell, hear, and vision. And we know that when those are our stimuli, and we pick that up, and then sensation has occurred. Let's look at some other senses, though, besides those five. The vestibular sense. The vestibular system provides the sense of balance and the information about body position that allows rapid compensatory movements in response to both self-induced and externally generated forces. For example, the feeling of spinning when quickly turning in a circle or being upside down on a carnival ride are both examples of the vestibular sense, informing us of what our body is doing in relation to the ground, whether it is moving or in a static position. So it essentially lets us know where our body is. Is it moving? Is it above ground? Is it spinning in a circle? It lets us know the location of our body. Kinesthesia is your body's ability to sense movement, action, and location. It's present in every muscle movement you have. And without kinesthesia, you wouldn't be able to move without thinking about your next step. Proprioception allows you to walk without consciously thinking about where to place your foot next. It lets you touch your elbow with your eyes closed. So we know that when we walk, we don't have to consciously think in our brain, put my one foot in front of the other. Kinesthesia just allows us to do that. It allows us to sense movement. Nociception is defined as the neurological process that encodes information about harmful stimuli, which has the potential to lead to the perception of pain. It involves both central, which is the spinal cord in the brain, and peripheral, which is the rest of the nervous system. It involves both central and peripheral events, and it can influence physiological responses and behaviors. An example of nociception would be breaking a bone, getting burned, or getting a paper cut. Thermoception refers to the body's ability to feel temperature changes. Thermal receptors on the skin register both heat and cold and abrupt changes in temperatures before transmitting that information to the brain by means of the sensory nerves. So that's what picks up the temperature changes and then transfers that information to the brain, where we process it as a temperature change or being cold or being hot. A little more info about sensation. I think this is in your book, the term absolute threshold, which is the lowest stimulus level that an organism can detect at least half the time. These limits can vary depending on factors such as motivation, expectation, and attention. In other words, there is no single absolute threshold for any sensory experience. It may vary from person to person and from one situation to the next. An example of absolute threshold would be detecting the tick of a clock in a quiet room. At what point does the tick get loud enough that you can detect it? Seeing a candle that's far away, at what point does the candle get bright enough that you can detect it? A drop of perfume in a large room, at what point is there enough perfume that you can detect the smell? The difference threshold is the minimum difference in the intensity of two stimuli necessary to detect they are different. For example, two lights, or two candles perhaps, may be illuminated at the same time. The difference threshold is reached when an observer can tell that one is brighter than the other. I included a little chart over here with further information about the difference and absolute threshold and their difference. Again, a difference threshold is the lowest amount of change that an individual can detect. It is measured in terms of how many just noticeable differences exist between two stimuli. When can you notice that there's a difference between the two candles? An example is vision. Subtle shifts of coloring perceivable to the naked eye are known as visual thresholds. When can you tell the difference between two colors? If two colors are close enough in hue and value, they might not be discernible to the human eye. The minimally perceptible difference between these two similar colors is known as the difference threshold. So let's go back and look at the absolute threshold, which again is the lowest level of stimulation a person can detect. The difference threshold again is the minimum amount of change in two stimuli that an individual can detect. So let's move on from sensation to perception. Perception refers to the way sensory information is organized, interpreted, and consciously experienced. So this is after sensation, after your body has a sensation and this information travels to the brain. Perception is how you perceive it, how it's organized, and how your brain interprets that information. Perception involves both bottom-up and top-down processing. Bottom-up processing begins with an external stimulus, and then that information, of course, travels to your brain. An example of this is stubbing your toe on a chair. The pain receptors detect pain, and then that information is sent to the brain where it is processed. On the other hand, top-down processing is different because it requires prior information. In other words, you use what you already know to make sense of the new information you encounter. It refers to how our brain utilizes existing knowledge and expectations to interpret new sensory information. So going back to the example of stubbing your toe, if you see the chair you have stubbed your toe on before and you avoid it to make sure it does not happen again. So you had to use prior information. You see the chair, you know you've stubbed your toe on it before, so therefore you avoid it. Your brain knows to avoid it because it was hurt by it to begin with. So that's the difference between bottom-up and top-down processing. A little more information about perception. The concept of sensory adaptation, a reduction in sensitivity to a stimulus after constant exposure to it. While sensory adaptation reduces our awareness of a stimulus, that helps free up our attention and resources to attend to other stimuli in our environment. So although it reduces our sense to one stimulus, that helps us pay attention to other things in our environment. It is worth noting that sensory adaptation does not occur with pain perception. We do not adjust to pain or adapt to pain. It is pretty much a constant. Another concept is inattentional blindness, which is the failure to notice something that is completely visible because the person was actively attending to something else and did not pay attention to other things. Essentially, the inability to see an object or a person in our midst. And the clip from a video, the people in this experiment were asked to count the number of people they saw in white t-shirts. And Simmons and Chabris found that people were so focused on counting the number of people in white t-shirts that they completely missed the gorilla in the midst. They showed actually that half of the observers failed to see the gorilla-suited assistant in a ball passing game. So it's inattentional blindness. We don't notice something because we're so focused on one thing. Signal detection theory is the ability to identify a stimulus when it is embedded in a distracting background. We're able to notice that even in a distracting background with other noise going on, we're able to identify a certain stimulus. The example, again, detecting stimuli is about how aware you are of the signal. For example, parents can hear their children over the noise, whereas those who don't have children are more likely to hear mostly the noise. A parent's ability, they have a greater ability to identify the stimulus than someone who is not a parent. That's it for sensation versus perception. As always, please let me know if you have any questions.